Everyone. Welcome to the NASPA AAKC. Did I say three A's? AAKC. Uh, my name is Demetrius Jaggers. I have the privilege of serving as the chair of our career professional development, and we are excited about the folks that we have with us this afternoon. Just a few technical announcements. If you could use the speaker view so that you are able to see who is speaking while they're speaking. And if you are not a member of the panel, if you would just mute yourself and also turn off your video so that folks are able to see the person is speaking. We are recording this afternoon, and so if you need to step out early, or if other folks who aren't able to attend, just know that we will have a recording available. And then towards the end of today's conversations, we will have an opportunity for Q&A. So please make sure that you hold on to your questions, or if you would prefer, you can send questions directly to me in the chat. So again, welcome everyone. For those of you who just joined us, my name is Demetrius Jaggers. I had the privilege of being a part of the leadership team for the African American Knowledge Community. And today we have a group of 5 panelists that will share their insight, wisdom, and knowledge. If you are just joining us, please make sure that you mute yourselves and also turn your video off. But welcome to Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. And the focus of our conversation today will be on bringing your authentic self to the workplace. So I'm going to ask our panelists if they would just start with introductions. You could talk about, of course, tell us your name, what your pronouns are. My pronouns are he, him, what your current role is, the institution that you are working at, and how many years you've been in the field of student affairs. And if it's helpful for you all, would it be helpful for me to just call folks? Okay, so based on how you are on my screen, I'm going to start with Dr. Kroom.
Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you may be in this world. My name is Dr. Natasha Kroom, and I'm an associate professor of higher education and student affairs at Clemson University. I'm also the special advisor to the Dean of the College Education for Inclusive Excellence. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm coming to you from the traditional homelands of the Cherokee peoples. And what else were we supposed to be? Oh, how long we've been in the field. I've been in the field about 15 years or so, with most of that at this point now being in the faculty role.
Thank you. Philip.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Philip Smith. I'm the Director for Student Activities. I go by he, him. I'm excited about this opportunity to speak with everybody. And I've actually been in the field for almost 17, 18 years now. So some longevity, but well, again, welcome. Thank you for allowing me to be here.
All right, and Dr. Lamisha Brown.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Lamisha Brown. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am currently the Director of Advising, Testing, and Career Services at St. Cloud Technical and Community College, which is a 2-year institution in Minnesota. And I have been in the field for 7.5 years.
Great, thank you. Let me also add that Dr. Kroom is also a member of the AAKC leadership team. She is currently our scholar in residence. So we appreciate her leadership in that role. Next, I am going to call on Dr. Danita Brown Young.
Well, good day, everyone. I am Dr. Danita Brown Young. I am the Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs at the University of Illinois, where I recognize and acknowledge that we are on the lands of the Peoria, the Kaskaskia, the Piankashaw, the Wea, the Miami, the Muscooten, the Ottawa, the Sauk, Muskogee, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Chickasaw nations. And I have had the pleasure and honor to serve in this field for over 24 years.
And Brandon.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brandon Harris. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the coordinator for residential experience in the Department of Fraternity and Sorority Life here at the University of Maryland, and I've been in the field now for 5 years.
All right. Thank you all for those introductions. And again, thank you to everyone who is joining us. So our first question this afternoon, can you describe your own process of identity development and how it impacts who you are and how you show up as a Black professional?
I'll kick us off. So I guess it starts with how I grew up. Grew up in the suburbs outside of Cleveland, Ohio. Mother, single family, things like that, and went to suburb schools, and then went to my last 2 years, went to inner city schools, and the culture shift of what does that look like, and kids telling you, oh, you're not Black enough, or you don't sound Black, and having to deal with that identity, or because my projection of where I was going to go career-wise or educational-wise was really headed towards college. And for some of those folks that I had to interact with at that time, that wasn't their trajectory. So I really had to struggle with what that looks like. And then from there, going to college, going to a historically Black college, understanding what that looked like. I went to Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina. And that's really where I think I learned a lot about what it is to be with my people, to understand what does that look like, and to build that. I grew up I'm going to share my age a little bit here, but I grew up with on a different world. So my thing was really coming in, and that's what the HBCU experience was going to really be, and accepting what that looks like. So I think for me, that's where I really initially got that. I did not go directly into the higher ed field. I went into business and sales and Fortune 500 companies before I decided what my calling was and to go into higher education. But even in that part, I felt like you still had to be yourself and find who you are as an African-American male in higher education. And what does that look like when you're working with, and if you look at our community, there's a lot more females that are part of the higher ed realm, but it's also not as many African-American folks that are in this realm as well. And I think it was just one of those things of, you were always that person that would get asked, well, what do you think the colored people would look like? What do you think? Like, you will always be that person that somebody would go to ask what your experiences are. So even like things that happened this summer, we were the ones that were pulled out and asked to speak on those things. And at some point it was, what, enough of that. We're tired of that. We've been sharing how we felt for years. So I think for us, it's a matter of where we are now, and understanding who we are as people, and being comfortable with that. And, I guess we'll jump into a little bit more for that, but at least that's what really came into mind for me, is the original high school, going to college and engulfing myself in those different experiences, and then always having to be the champion within the professional realm has got me to where I am, and we can talk about that more with some of the other questions that you have prepared.
I would say go ahead. Okay, I'm good. I, like Philip, have to start with my past. I am a big fan of the Strengths Quest tool. And so one of my top 5 strengths is context. So it's important for me to connect that past with the present. Since I'm a person who really values my faith, my family, my friends, education and service, it's because of my family, because how they instilled that notion of learning and leading and giving back to the community at an early age. is how my identities have been shaped over the last few years. And particularly since my great-great-grandparents were one of the first African-American families to settle in Kent, Ohio, where Kent State University is located, in one of my alma maters. And when I think about my great-great-grandmother, who was in charge of educating the families and children of the railroad, and when I think about my grandparents and my parents and their involvement in community organizations and church and education, serving as foster parents, all of that plays into shaping my identity. So when I think about the field that we're in terms of education and servanthood, serving and helping others succeed, that's truly in my bloodline. And that's how my identity has been shaped over these last, all my life. That's all I've known and seen, particularly in suburban communities. I grew up in Kent, Ohio. And so it is a suburb of, depending on who you talk to, some people want to claim it's a suburb of Akron, some people claim it's a suburb of Cleveland. But again, it is about investing into people, pouring into people, definitely giving back to and supporting the Black community. But for sure, I think about my family and the friends and the mentors that I've had that helped me be who the person I am today.
Yeah, I can jump in, and I'll try to be brief. I mean, similarly, I think back to growing up. So I grew up a military dependent where my mother was Army. And so what that meant was we moved around the world. And so today I talk about it as a privilege, even though it's a very complicated scenario as I think about these things now, but still a privileged positionality to be able to have lived in other countries, to have been able to go to schools, generally all my life in an actual multicultural community. Overseas, I had Black teachers. Like it was a little bit, it was different, right, than I think a lot of folks experience that folks tend to have in the States. But I want to fast forward to thinking about like identity development and like how it has shown up for me as a Black professional. And so I'm gonna fast forward to before I went to my master's program. Well, so we have these interview days, right? So I remember going to interview days at Texas A&M University. And so if anybody is familiar with anything about Texas A&M University, the number one most conservative rated school consistently, blah, 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 right? And I remember showing up, suited and booted, 3-piece heels, hair laid, straightened, whatever. I was permanent up at the time, and one of my best good friends till today, and I'm gonna name her by name because she'd appreciate this story. Akila Jones was also there. And let me tell you, if any of you on this call know Akila, from Flint, Michigan, all right? Akila showed up to Texas A&M University's interview days with, it's a cornrow do where it had some pieces. It was laid, okay? That's how I could describe it today. But let me tell you, back then, I was like, what the hell are you thinking about? Like, these white folks is not finna let you up in here. And if anybody knows Akila, her, you said Strengths Quest, Dr. Young, her number one is woo, right? She walk in the space, she walk out, she know everybody's stuff, okay? She gonna know everybody's stuff. So, right, like this, just the opposite of number one most conservative environment, college environment, right? And if it weren't for Akila, actually, I think she and I's relationship at that time actually kicked me into the encounter aspect of Black identity development. Because, when we both got into the program, we ended up being cohort mates. The only two, well, there were other students of color in our cohort and one multiracial Latino and Black guy, but essentially in terms of just being just regular old Black, we was it, okay? It was some regular Black girls. And Akila wrote me a letter and said, girl, we're gonna be friends because we the only Black people in here. And so whatever your issues are, get over it. And I was like, girl, you right. We about to be it. But if it wasn't for that, because prior to that, the ways that I thought about race for myself were very similar to what Philip was saying, in that most of the overt narratives that I received about race were around colorism, being light-skinned, having long hair. You talk white was something that I heard very often. These weren't messages that were coming from white people directly, right? So, I mean, now I would definitely be like, yeah, that's some straight up white supremacist bullshit that we're internalizing, and sure. But back then I didn't have that language. And so, for me, having that encounter and immersion experience, I mean, look, I was like, perms, nah, we going natural. Like, and all of this again happened as a master's student. And, me thinking about the ways that I see other Black folks around me, it really allowed me to challenge what I thought I knew. And to even move away from the idea of the Black community to acknowledging that there are Black communities, because everyone is not having the same experience. So we might be, the people, but not everyone's having the same experience. And so even now, as a faculty member, when Black students show up, in my office, inevitably, whether they be in our programs or not, because, we got to talk to all the Black people in the building because their faculty aren't doing it. It's really, for me, become about how do I support who they are and where they are and how they want to show up in a space. Because I just remember that it wasn't until I was going into a master's program that I even really became critical of my own perspectives of what it meant to be a part of Black communities in any real way.
So I would like to just say a few things in terms of my own experience. So I grew up in a single parent household. I'm first gen, also come from a low income background. And so for me, a lot of my identity was kind of wrapped up in how can I serve, and then how can I provide an example. So I have an older brother and a younger brother from my mother. And with me being the first one to go to college, I'm like, okay, I need to show my younger brother that there is a different route that he could go if that's what he chose to do. And how can I be an example for nieces and nephews and other family members? And so for me, that was a really important part of my experience growing up. But when I think of my identity development, particularly as a Black person, I often go to my doctoral program, right? So later in life, I'm in my late 20s. That was the first time I ever engaged in conversations around my own privilege. And so, as a Black woman, I could talk to you about the ways in which I've felt oppressed, I've been oppressed, but I couldn't talk to you about the ways that I experience privilege as a person who identifies as a Christian or a person who identifies as heterosexual or any of these things. And so that was the first time where I really had to stop and think about my identity as a whole and how my identities intersected with each other. And what does that mean to be a Black professional who really does want to create a positive and equitable experience for students and for colleagues. Let me tell y'all, that was hard. So for me, I didn't grow up in the church. I wasn't raised in the church, but when I moved to Georgia from Washington, that was when I first really was heavily engaged. And for about 7 years was in church multiple times a week. right? But that really impacted the way that I thought about folks who made meaning in a way outside of Jesus. And honestly, for folks who identify within the LGBTQ community. And so in my doctoral program, now I'm really having to unlearn things that I had learned, even though those messages weren't necessarily explicit, right? In terms of how you interact with other people. But it just became clear to me like, oh, I'm oppressive, right? And I'm not acknowledging folks' identity in the way that I need to be. And I'm not really being inclusive and creating equitable opportunities, right? So I thought a lot about, well, what type of educator do I want to be? What type of professional do I want to be when I go into the field, right? I don't want to be a person who is producing harm for other people, particularly other people who look like me. And so that was a hard process. And I think it's always ongoing, right? There isn't a point where we just completely arrive. Our development within our identity continues to go for as long as we live. So those are a few things I wanted to share.
I know we're on time. Just a good context for me, I have a similar background like Dr. Brown, as well as low income, single parent household for the first 12 years of my life, also being on Section 8 in Las Vegas, Nevada. But no one can ever tell just due to I was still raised in the suburbs of Las Vegas, Nevada too. For race, for the identities that I hold, which is Black and queer, and I'm differently able as well. We always talked about race in the church. So I was raised in the church, Black history programs. We just always learning about who we are. So I always knew the truth about Black history from an early age. But then I got into the TRIO program, Upward Bound, and that's when I started really learning that I wanted to go to school. I never thought about going to college until I went to Upward Bound. And that's when I told myself, I'm going to actually get a master's degree as well. Once I learned about all the things you can do. And I thought like I was going to get an education or business and told myself to make lots of money. However, I'm here in student affairs. But still, that's where I really learned about me being Black more, and just also learning that there's so many different Black experiences, right? Even in Las Vegas. It's a suburb. They used to make fun of me saying, oh, you're the Henderson kids. Y'all the suburb proper kids. And I'm like, what? Like, you don't know my life. Like, you don't know what goes on between those four walls in my house. And so that's where I really learned about the Black experience is very diverse, even in Nevada of where there's North Las Vegas, Henderson, and the West Side and so forth. And then when I got to Indiana State, that's where I started. I don't know if anyone knows Valerie Hart Craig in the African American Cultural Center. That's where I learned more about just who I am as a Black person. And then once I got to graduate school, that's where I started really unlearning things about me, about some of the traditions that are taught within the Black community, specifically when it comes into the LGBTQ community, because that's when I started really becoming aware about who I am and how I show up in those spaces. And so in grad school really taught me a lot about myself, specifically the intersecting identities and about intersectionality. There is still that Black experience too for Black queer people, Black different able people, Black Jewish people, Black Muslims, and so forth. And so I think that experience paired with my experience within Phi Beta Sigma as well definitely was key, because I'm on a line of 13 other individuals on my line, and not everybody, all my brothers on my line believe in Jesus, some are Muslim, and that's where I learned about even how we show up at chapter meetings was different. We stopped praying because we're like, let's not do that. Let's just have like our own moment of silence, because even though the organization is founded on Christian values, we still want to be inclusive of others in the room. And then SACSA, Jacksonville SACSA, I think that was 2015 15, I learned about privilege, about the privileges that I hold. There was a group, we went to a program and literally at the table said, what privileges do you hold? And so forth. I looked over to my supervisor, Dr. Rio Morris. I'm like, Rio, we Black, we don't have privilege. That's not a thing for us. And then that's kind of when I started, she's like, let's dig deep. And I was like, I'm Black, gay, this. And she's like, no, also you're cisgender, you're still a man. And so really digging deep into unlearning some things as well, like, oh, when I come in the room, I still need to make space for others in this space. And then also working in residence life, it could be very anti-Black, that I need to show up to ensure that we are kind of challenging some of those policies, and actually how am I showing up of being oppressive as well as a supervisor, to RAs and graduate assistants. And so that's kind of how I've been just developing. I still feel like I'm in the development mode. I'm in my late 20s as well. But definitely, I think these last couple of years, I've been doing a lot of unlearning. I've taken took a social justice course here at the University of Maryland. Dr. Kimmy Griffin, which is an amazing instructor that really challenged about how I show up as a practitioner and how I show up as like in activism. Am I an activist? Am I an advocate? Am I a scholar activist? And so just really still learning about how I show up for students and how the identities I hold to contribute to the experience here in student affairs.
So let me just say thank you all for those answers. And I just wanted to say I appreciate you all for the authenticity that you all are bringing to this conversation. And the fact that, you know, that I wanted to start with this question for me was about really kind of tearing down the myth that, you know, all Black folks are the same, right? We're not a monolith. And so I think before we can begin to talk about, you know, the ways in which we navigate white environments or white spaces, I think we have to have some sense of who we are and what our identities are and how we show up so that we can show up and be as authentic as we can. So thank you all for those responses. The next question that I want to ask you all, what does it mean being authentically Black in your work environment? What does that mean for you?
I can respond to this. So, you know, I often hear feedback from people that they appreciate how authentic or genuine I am. And then that makes me wonder, like, to your question, is like, what does that really mean? Then that makes me think about what about the space within which we occupy is disingenuine or inauthentic. And so that makes me think about the ways in which whiteness shows up to create this a space where it's not that authenticity is not welcomed, it's just that certain authenticity is not welcomed. And right, so like if I'm thinking about being authentic as being true to one's nature, I used to have a colleague who her big word was professionalism. And it would drive me to want to do a lot of not positive things because I'm like, you're using the word professionalism to codify whiteness essentially, and that's not okay. And so, you know, for me, similar to other folks, like I show up in my identities as a service-oriented person, as right, I like how I think Jeff maybe is saying like passion is oftentimes viewed as aggression. And it's like, no, it doesn't. it doesn't have to be that way. And so then calling that kind of stuff out to me feels like I'm being authentic, right? Like showing up in a space consistently feels for me like I'm being authentic. Because I find that I have a lot of colleagues, particularly white folks and other communities of color who are playing the game, right? Who you see them in one space and then you see them in another, you be like, whoa, hold up, who this? Who are you? Like you a whole different person right now. And then all of that kind of gets couched under, you know, professionalism, or it gets couched under like what's appropriate. And it's like, is it appropriate to be inconsistent in like personality? And you know what I'm saying? Like is something wrong with the picture? And so for me, it is right, like what it means to be authentic is showing up consistently, showing up in service, showing up in care for other human beings, you know, making principled, informed decisions in my workspace, being able to articulate those principled, informed decisions. It's not you know, it's not wishy-washy. So I feel like a lot of spaces that I show up in, it feels inauthentic because folks are just wishy-washy. Like, I don't like that.
I'm going to try to jump in here. I think for me, I love everything that you said, Dr. Kroom. And I think for me, it's just a matter of you have to be able to show up in your spaces as who you are. And people, whether they look like you or not, need to be able to take whatever you're putting out and being able to receive that as who you are. And I think some of the issues that at least when I feel like I'm sharing who I am, or it doesn't meet somebody else's standards, right? Or another brother or sister standards of what that looks like. And I have 3, you know, beautiful Black children that I have to, you know, make sure that they understand what their Blackness looks like, and being able to prepare them from the world as they are now soon to be teenagers. But I think as far as my authenticity is really showing up, and especially for our students, our minority students in spaces, particularly at a predominantly white institutions, and how they feel like they have that ally to be able to come to and to express. I mean, my students from the different campuses that I've worked at over my career, you know, they call me Uncle Phil because of that. They feel like that's that big brother, that family member, that person that they could kind of go to. And I think that's how I show my authenticity, is my ways of being able to connect with those students of color at the different institutions. And I just think that there's that hump that we as people of color have to get over, is I may not sound like you, I may not act like you, but that doesn't make me any different from who you are and what you're trying to accomplish, and the goals and things that you're trying to do on your different campuses as well. So I think that's just the part at least I wanted to share.
And it might make you different, right? It actually might make us different, and like that should be okay. Right? Like we might have the same similar goals, right, and be different, and that's okay.
Yeah, and I think that's the challenge that we face when we're all trying to go to the same direction. Yeah, we're all pushing for the same direction. You just have your way of doing, I have my way of doing it, and people gotta say, stop getting in our own way of being able to accomplish the goals. And I think that's the struggle currently.
Well, as I would say, you know, as I mentioned earlier, the Strengths Quest before, I'm a very competitive person. So for those who, I see some people who I recognize on this call, I'm very competitive, which means I want to do the best job that I can do, but I also want to push and challenge others to be the best that they can be. And I don't give up easily without a fight. So for me, that's being authentic. And who I am, just a small piece of who I am. But I have to understand the power that race plays when I do walk into a space. So when I do show up with my authentic self, how can I leverage the power of that competitiveness? And how will that be interpreted because I am Black? I show up with all of my identities, and obviously, being a person who identifies as a woman, I'm usually the younger of my peers who are in the room. But again, the first, that they will see is this Black person, this Black identity. So again, how will that be interpreted when I'm showing up in spaces? And will my passion for people, particularly Black and brown and, people of color, will that be interpreted as showing favoritism or playing the race card when I'm looking at systemic barriers that are placed in front of particularly our students and our staff in terms of mobility? Being authentically Black for me is also about, understanding who is in that room, who is at the table, how to be politically savvy, at the levels that we are at. I need to understand who are those decision makers in the room. And, most of the time they have been men, they have been white. And so you do have to learn how to use that authenticity, that your caring nature, your passion, whatever your values are, you've got to make sure that they are well understood to the people who are in the room. And we know that sometimes authenticity can come with a price, I should say. But you have to be able to navigate and code switch at some times and speak the language, but it also gives you that opportunity to educate the people in the room about issues, the current language, help them understand where you're coming from, not just that you are conforming to what their ideas are and their notions. But for me, it is just being true to myself and really pushing and challenging people and feeling comfortable with challenging people, because this is a new day, and we have so many wonderful, talented Black professionals and brown professionals who really have so much to contribute to really make sustainable change. And so I am definitely aware of who I am, and there are times, when I think about my authentic, true self, people get on my nerves, absolutely. But it's how a lot of times I'm in my head in a meeting and I'm in constant prayer, or, I have to really fix my face, as my good friends and my husband always like, girl, you need to fix your face. Because I already know, if I really truly let it show, everything that we work for and strive toward can fall apart. So again, being authentically Black also means that you have to be politically savvy, but you have to stay true to who you are.
I think for me, Dr. Young said something really great about it comes at for a price, and I definitely agree with that. And also, that's the reason why I only work at now certain institutions and be in certain spaces because of how I show up. I show up however I want when it comes to dress. And not saying that I'm just wearing whatever to work, but more so like right now I have my Beyonce pin, I got my stone. Some days I might beat my face, I have my braids in. And that's who I am, that's what I represent. And I think also it comes to emotional intelligence. Dr. Kroom said that earlier in the chat about emotional intelligence. I think that's very key about reading the room, what spaces you are in. For me, I'm a relator in strengths. And I like to relate to the people who I'm working with, the students who I'm working with as well. Currently in my role, I work mainly with graduate students. And so I still feel like I'm in their age group to a degree and their experiences. I learn a lot from them. And so for me, it's just about, I think, just emotional intelligence. And then also there is the politicalness in the room, and understand how to navigate that as well. But then also showing up at the interview, I think that's very key. That's how I landed here at the University of Maryland. It's because I told myself I'm not going to put on this facade anymore. When I was working at University of Tennessee, I felt like I was putting on a facade my first year, and I really was like, let me show up how I want to show up and how I want to work. And I think that really played a very key thing in my my job search when I landed here at University of Maryland, and why I chose University of Maryland, and not wanting to live in more of the rural environments anymore, just because I knew, me being a city boy, I knew that the experiences I wanted were here in the city. So yeah, just trying to keep it short. Yeah.
So some of you all have talked a little bit about how you navigate environments. So the next question actually is, in what ways have you been able to navigate predominantly white working environments as it relates to, how you have progressed in your career, as it relates to the ways in which you develop relationships, both within the Black community, but then across, racial and cultural identity. So if you all might speak to what it's been like for you to navigate predominantly white environments as professionals.
So my first position outside of my master's program was actually at a HBCU. So for me, that was a dream. Honestly, I had always been in predominantly white environments as far as institutions. So I know that's not the question, so I won't go into that. However, so as I was coming to the end of my doctoral program, I accepted a full-time position in Crookston, Minnesota. And so when before I interviewed, I actually reached out to the person who would be my direct supervisor to do like an informational interview. Just wanted to talk with him to learn more about the position and more about him. Because for me, I wanted to ask him, how do you supervise people who look like me, essentially? Like, what is your approach to supervising Black people, Black women? And so, in that conversation, I felt good because, as a white man, he acknowledged, the fact that he knows he has privilege. He talked about, what his current approach is. He put me in contact with someone who he had had a, mentorship relationship with as a means for me to be able to talk with them about him and ask them some questions. And he was open with saying, you will be the only Black woman in leadership here. And so I'm like, okay. I think being at the University of Georgia and in the College Student Affairs Administration program, which had a lot of Black folks, I had so much support there. So I'm like, you know what? I've been at PWIs, like, it'll be okay. And when I went, it was a shock for sure because the city was small, it was rural, and it was white, which I was used to that, but just in a very different context. So it was hard. It was very hard. There were multiple weekends where I just kind of bawled my eyes out because I'm like, I can't do this. Like, I don't know how I'm going to make it here. I didn't have community in the way that I was used to having at UGA. So it was just very difficult. And I was being microaggressed, right? So thankfully, my supervisor did also hire 2 other women of color to work under me. And so I appreciate that. So my team wasn't all white. However, I was also aware of what it might look like if I was hanging out with them and spending so much time with them as 2 women of color that I really didn't, spend as much time with them as I would have loved to. But I was getting called both of their names, right? I'm like, okay, the other Black woman and I look completely different. Her hair is straight and long. I have locks. The other woman is Latinx. Our skin complexions are very different. Like, we look nothing alike, right? Or, times where I was disrespected by faculty members or, just or being asked if I'm a student at a faculty and staff, like in service. definitely not, right? So all of these things that I'm having to navigate in this environment, which essentially is, you know, gendered racism and how that shows up, right? And so I was appreciative that I could lean on my supervisor and talk with him and kind of talk through what was going on, like within the work environment. But then outside of it, I am partnered. And so I'm thankful that I didn't move alone because I know I most certainly would not have lasted as long as I did at my previous institution. But here was a Black person that I came home to every day, and I could see someone who looks like me, right? And we could talk about what I was experiencing, and he would encourage me um, as I was going through that. And so it was difficult kind of going through, but I'll just end to say for me, what that looked like in the end was making the decision to leave. And sometimes that's the decision that you might need to make. Instead of staying in the environment, you might need to leave. And so that's what I did. So I'll end there so someone else can answer.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think you have to sometimes know when your time is up with that place. I think for me, when I was at Georgia State University previously, before I got here, they gave me the job. I was doing the job as that next step, but then when it was time to hire and to be considered for the role, it was like, you don't have the experience, and when you looked at everybody that they brought in, it was definitely not someone that looked like me, and who they hired did not look like me as well. And I think that's, for me, made me really understand what is my self-worth, what am I worth, what do I know that I'm bringing to the table, and the spaces that I am in, like Dr. Young has said. And I think that's important for me as I navigate through this career field, and knowing that, hey, you know what, for me, I have to add on the degrees and show up in these different spaces where I can show my expertise. But I think where my struggle is that, and I struggled with this over the course of my career, is that as soon as something hits the fan, you're the first person that they come to asking almost for forgiveness. And I think that's the part where we need to stop trying to, as Black professionals in that field, I'm not your teacher. I can't teach you what my experience is. You need to learn what that experience is, or you do your research. Here's a couple things that you can read. Here's a couple things you can watch. It's not my place to teach you what my struggle is. And I think that's the part that I push back on in my spaces that I'm in, to say, I can't do the work for you. I can't, I'm already carrying it. I can now teach you. I can't transfer that to you. So I think it's really important to again, be authentic as who you are, but also push back to say, I'm not your token either.
Yeah, for me, navigating the work environments, I always believe in personal affects the work life as well. I'm a past resident, I'm still kind of residence life professional. So I live where I work, right? And so I think that really matters. And I would say I'm similar again to Dr. Brown of your experience at University of Georgia is how I felt at Central Arkansas. I was in Conway, Arkansas, but my program was lots of Black people. My department I was working in was it was predominantly Black people, and it was a Black woman ran assistant director team. So for me, I was like, oh, I could go to Tennessee. I could go to Knoxville, Tennessee. I could do it. I can do it. And my first year, within my first 3 months, I was like, I got to go. My mentor is actually on this call too. And that's the same year that Kelly and I got connected. And I used to call Kelly like, I'm over this. Like, I'm ready to go like tomorrow. Like, I can't do this. Just because within the first month of the school year, I was dealing with a racist graduate student who came up to me and said he don't see color, and about how he doesn't believe in the queer identity. And I'm like, okay, this is gonna be a great time. And then also supervising all white man staff. So, which was very challenging in so many ways. And for me, how I navigated the work environment there and actually had the job to work for me was really finding like the key players at the institution who I know who will work with me. So I ended up, Dr. Cuevas is now the vice chancellor there. And I used to have appointments with Dr. Cuevas. I used to tell him everything like, this is what's going on. I don't know what's happening. And having him in a key role at the institution, but then also finding the white allies in the room that actually was truly down for me and who could be my advocate in the room when I'm not in the room was very key as well. And I think my second year there, I ended up having Black woman supervisor and literally find, yes, Dr. Kern sponsors. And literally one thing I asked for her was when I'm not in the room, just can you please just be my advocate, just to ensure I'm okay and safe, because I was the only Black man in the department there. And then my second year there, I was the only Black person there. The first year was only us 2 people for 6 months, and then it was just me. So that's kind of how I navigated the work environment. But then too, on the personal side, that's where I learned about the Urban League in the city, and then even trying to get connected within my fraternity of just different connections to connections within the city, and finding out about East Knoxville. Like that's where the history behind like Black people in Knoxville is at. And so I think that also played a key role in how I got to be connected with people and stay connected with people from Knoxville as well, who identify as Black.
So I'm sorry, go ahead, Dr. Young.
No, I was just going to piggyback on what Brandon was talking about, you know, finding people like your allies, building your allies first and connecting with folks, particularly in that work environment, in that space, who that you can share your goals, your vision with, understanding that, you know, that there's going to be those varying personalities around, but you have to really put yourself out there, and it's not easy to do that. But connect with those individuals who may have those that influence. But in terms of, you know, your personal connections, which can also bleed into the professional realm, for me, it's important that I get connected to the community, because, you know, while you are working, you are a part of the community. So for me, yes, I am grateful that I am involved with several organizations. You know, I find community within my church, but that also helps strengthen, you know, I think that professional realm, and to have some support. If you've got an environment where it's always beating you down, you know that there's lots of high racial tensions going on and nobody seems to do anything about it, then maybe you can try to connect with those allies, those like-minded individuals, to really put a call to action, so to speak, into place to make some of that change, because it is so important that you have supportive community members, you know, supportive friends. When I think back, I have spent time in West Virginia, and when I was at West Virginia, one of my students was married to the Grand Dragon of the KKK. And so, and there weren't that many people of color even on the campus. It was a small regional campus. And out of like 4,000 individuals, I think maybe 10 of us were people of color identified. And so, you know, you try to, and not always people identified with their own racial or ethnic identity, but it is important that you have people who you can turn to, who you can connect with if you're going to make it through that community.
I also think that sometimes folks, just real quickly, like so the whole idea of like building our communities and the multiple roles in our communities, right? So whether that be allies, whether that be accomplices, or whatever role it is that we have in our communities. But I have found that ensuring that I'm staying connected to community communities external to the institution in of itself is super important also. Because I see in the chat, where was it? Dr. Grimes was saying, you know, are we having the conversation about these institutions that are or have been hostile? And my first response to that is show me one that ain't. Show me an institution of higher education in these United States of America that's not built on colonialist, white supremacist, cishet, capitalistic patriarchy. And then maybe we can all go there. But there's not one, right? So while there may be places where Black folks are staying longer, I don't know that we can equate that to it's always necessarily because it's better, right? Like people are making all kinds of choices. I talk a lot about, I have to ask myself every day the question, what am I willing to give? I literally work on a plantation. If you did, Clemson literally built on a plantation, like an actual one with enslaved people and everything, where every day I walk past these really big, beautiful trees and I think to myself, wow, I wonder how much blood of the ancestors it took for that tree to be that thick and that beautiful. Like that's literally a thought that I have every day. But what am I willing to give to be in this space? Right? And so is it that I'm willing to give up some of who I am? Is it, and it's not, right? Like, so I think we're always having to negotiate, and that's everyone, particularly communities of color or folks who find themselves being minoritized in any kind of way. Like we're always having to negotiate the space, whether that's where we work, the grocery store, church, whatever. And so I guess I'm just like, find me, if you could name for me a university or college, okay, that is not built in that, then hey, we all going. Let's all go. Because short of starting our own, which if you haven't noticed, we're all unlearning things all the time, still is not going to guarantee that we don't like create policies and practices built on the beast. It's like, well, what are we gonna do? Because at this point, I've said, if I didn't get tenure, I'm moving to Chicago. I'm living with my best friends who are also in student affairs, and I'm working at Starbucks. And that's just gonna be what it is. Because I'm just not willing, there's just some things that I'm not willing to give to do this work. And I don't know that I don't think it's selfish, because I think Black folks, and honestly, I'm as a Black woman, like, I don't wanna be your mammy. I wanna be your mammy. I want to take care of everybody. I want to take care of this 3.5-month-old puppy that's right here. That's who I am responsible for in my life. And yeah, I'm responsible to our community, but I can't give everything to work community, right? Like, so I'm not saying I don't feel a responsibility to Black communities, because I obviously do, and anybody who knows me knows that. But I also, it's still a negotiation though. It's always going to be a negotiation. And that, I don't think that makes one selfish to have those critical conversations with yourself, to think about that.
I see a lot of finger snaps, a lot of hearts and hand claps. Thank you, Dr. Krumman. Thank you all for providing context. And I think that's something that I think we have to think more about, the tension between, you know, being Black and being, you know, employees, being connected to institutions that have been rooted in our oppression, and how do we navigate our own self-care? How do we navigate our own, you know, life? You know, one of the things I talk about a lot is just quality of life, right? Is, you know, how do we navigate our own quality of life, knowing that we're trying to make changes in institutions that have been historically rooted in our oppression. And so I don't know if anyone else wants to speak to that, to the ways in which you manage that tension, all the while, you know, experiencing and dealing with the microaggressions, the societal, racial, and gender trauma, particularly, you know, in the last year and a half that we've all been experiencing in different ways. What are ways that you've been able to cope, to maintain, self-care, maintain a sense of, health. And for me, I would just say that it's been by, seeing a therapist on a regular basis. And I don't know for others what that has looked like.
Yeah, I would start off saying when I was at Tennessee, I was in therapy every single week. My second year there, I was like, if I'm gonna stay here right now, I need to go to therapy, or someone's not gonna have a great day or a great experience at Tennessee anymore. And so I started therapy there, and then also, if you look up the history of University of Tennessee and just the past 5 years of things that have happened on the campus, there's everything that's happening nationally has happened within Knoxville, Tennessee. And so saying that there was swastikas and slurs that were told to me, and even conduct meetings that went real left because people brought MAGA hats and stuff. Like, it was a very interesting time. And so for me, I connected with Dr. Jaggers here. I connected with other Black people on the campus. I'd really say finding that community and joining, like, if you are part of like the affinity groups on campus, or if your department has those affinity groups. I know here at University of Maryland, we really are big on affinity groups in the division and in different departments. I really think those are very key as well, just for like having those discussions at work. And then also, self-care is very key. So when I say self-care, I mean taking actual time off away from work, going on vacations. I used to do literally something like once a month. I used to do a 3-day weekend in Tennessee. I was close to Charlotte, Nashville, and Atlanta. So I usually pick one of those 3 cities. And I'm like, let's go, because there's nothing there. At the time, I was single in Knoxville too. So I was like, dating life is not really there for me as a Black queer man. And then also with I have I'm neurodivergent, which is an autoimmune disease, Guillain-Barré syndrome. And so even with that, like, if I did not take the time to find like my people and take the care out, my health was going to be affected by it. Because me stressing and my fatigue level will end up getting me sick at the end of the day with my nerves and so forth. And so for me, those are like the key ways that I try to manage throughout everything, but then too, showing up for students as well. So I always felt like I still had a responsibility for the Black students at Tennessee. And like here at Maryland for our Black grad students, our department's predominantly Black when it comes to our graduate staff was showing up for them at the meetings or at the events. I remember I took a price, right, at Tennessee, where there was a forum with the university system's president and their board. And I decided to speak up, and I said some things up on the mic. And this is where a lot of students, other staff, my director was there. And not saying I didn't say nothing like wild off the chain, but I definitely like acknowledge and name what's going on and the harm that they are doing. And people were happy. Other Black staff started speaking up, and other Black students started speaking up. And I was just happy that people are finally speaking up and raising awareness of what is exactly going on at these institutions. Because I think sometimes we try to go in the bushes like, well, we talk in our little circles, but we're not actually bringing it up in the larger group to the accomplices who are in the room to elevate the voices that are needed. And so those are like the key things how I navigate just like the microaggressions and so forth. And also I am a spiritual person, so I did find a church out here in DC prior to the pandemic that is LGBT friendly as well. It's a black church as well. So that really assisted me here at Maryland. It kept me grounded pre-pandemic.
I think for me, I found hobbies. I mean, me and my fiance, we got a house a year ago, so I dove into a lot of house projects to keep me busy over the course of this last year. Got into a little bit of gardening, so made my own vegetables and things like that. So that's just been one of those things that was new, and you had a lot of extra time on your hands because you're going to go anywhere and try to figure things out. So I think that for me was one of those things that really helped. We also got a puppy, 10-month-old, 61-pound puppy. So he's out of house at home with that. But I'm also diving into this this higher education program that I'm in. So working towards that doctoral degree. And for me, I think what that does in this realm and in this space really is that it's allowing me or preparing me and helping me for that next step. I've been a director for a few years, and I know this is not my final step. I want to be in those rooms, those same rooms that Dr. Young is in, right? And be able to have those space. And I know that this degree is going to help that, because I know once I'm in those rooms, those students of color that I have that affinity for, that I want to help, I know that I could be that voice in that room to really make those changes that need to actually be made. And I think that's, for me, has been that motivation of pushing through to get that extra degree that's being needed. And I think that's what's going to actually help me and help my people as well as we move forward.
I think I would add for me about like dealing with microaggressions of any kind. That's the question we're on, right? That stereotype bias, all that. Yeah. Like, I don't know. For me, it's therapeutic to name it. But I'm also petty and direct. And I also have tenure, so I recognize that there's a privilege in being a faculty member and being able to tell somebody to go whatever with a mess. And so I find much joy in calling people out on their foolishness. I also find a lot of joy in receipts and like keeping receipts and having the receipts and sending the receipts and expecting action, and then thinking, and of course, like thinking 3 steps ahead, like we always have to do. If there's no action taken, like, if folks ain't making moves, what's my next step? Is it escalating? Is it finding some little birdies who are outside of the context who need to know that could make have some authority here? And I will say the other thing, in addition to all the other things folks are saying in terms of therapy, I got a dog. I mean, she wasn't, I always have loved animals. I've always had dogs. So she's my first personal baby. She's a 3.5-month-old, 22-pound Staffordshire Terrier, otherwise known as a pit bull. And she's been great. Like, I will say that during the pandemic, what I have learned in the short time that I've had her is that some of this shit ain't that important. And I'm gonna say that again. What I have learned by having to take care of this dog who was like 7 weeks, I think 7 or 8 weeks when I got her, is that some of this stuff these white folks are talking about just ain't that important. And I don't have to. I don't have to. And I do find I'm moving into a point in my life and my career where I'm realizing that I am allowing socially constructed narratives of what it means to be a Black woman in particular dictate how I perform Black woman at work. And what Lil Meadow, as in Palmetto, because she's from South Carolina, since our roots, Lil Meadow has taught me is that some of that I don't have to. And I can say I don't have to and still be responsible to my community, and that be okay. And the only other thing I'll add is, I don't think we think about this a lot because we think it's expensive, but get your litigation fund up, people. Too many of us are experiencing things in our job place that if we took this university to court, you would win. You would win, but you don't got your litigation fund. It's just like I tell my PhD students at class 1, oh, you're going to graduate, so you need a graduation fund. You know what I'm saying? The gown costs $900. If you get to the end and you ain't got it, well, that's a problem. Listen, we know these institutions are on some mess. get your funds up. If you're looking for cheap, I don't work for them, so don't go being like, Dr. Croom told me to go get this. Legal Shield is a great inexpensive resource if you're looking for some inexpensive legal services. Legal Shield, it doesn't cost much, but don't rely on institutional what them people called ombuds persons, because their job is to protect the institution, not you. Legal their job is to protect the institution, not you. So I need you to have your own legal protection also, because I bet if we start actually taking these institutions to court and they haven't come up with this money, they stop with the foolishness in some respects.
I think I hear a couple of amens. So I know that we have about 16 minutes left, and we've had some folks put some questions in the chat. Some have been answered, but I wanted to make sure that we have some time for any questions. So if you would like to place a question in the chat, or if you would feel comfortable unmuting yourself, you can also ask a question to our panelists. So until there's a question, I got a list of questions here. I just wanted to make time. Some of the things that you all talked about was about community. So can you talk about, well, before we go to that question, what have you or do you do to celebrate and honor your Blackness, whether that's in the workplace or in your personal life? How do you maintain your own connectedness to your identity and to appreciating what it means to be Black? I'm often reminded, sometimes I had to remind myself, and I saw this, I think it was a meme earlier this week, that it's not tiring being Black. What's tiring is the white supremacists, the patriarchal, the systems and structures that have been created that really tire us down. It's not our identity. So what does it look like to honor your Blackness and your other identities as you move through work and life?
Well, I think for me, when I think about honoring and celebrating my own Blackness, I have to honor and celebrate my past, going back to that context, and that is my family. My grandparents, my parents, my aunts and uncles fought too hard to help get me and others to where we need to be, right? They have poured into me, when I think about my brothers, my nephews and my nieces. And so the way I would celebrate and honor that Blackness is never forgetting who you are and whose you are. I go back to, I have been raised in the church and very steeped in that faith and that prayer, but doing the best that I can do, right? Nobody can take that away. You can always try and do the best that you can do. And for me, honoring that Blackness and celebrating that Blackness is making sure that we are taking care of one another, that we are taking care of the community, that we are, fighting for social justice, that we're trying to make change, which is very difficult. The roles that we are in, and I don't care what your title is, they're very hard, they're very demanding. And so I appreciate you asking that question earlier about taking care of your own well-being in your own mental space, because that is so important, because we are constantly giving. And then when you look around, what can you give if you are depleted? And I appreciate my mentors and colleagues that always talk about saying, hey, it's just like when you're on the airplane and they talk about in times of trouble and turbulence, make sure that you're putting on your oxygen mask first before you assist others. that's what we have to do. But, moving forward with, celebrating and honoring that is, paying homage to my family, and really pulling up and pulling people to where they need to be and where they want to be. That's how I celebrate and honor the Blackness.
So there's a few things that I think about, but one thing that comes to mind for me and how I might honor myself and my identities in the workplace is to say no when I'm at capacity for some things. And so I recognize that for me, um, as a Black person, there's a lot of unpaid labor, right? There's a lot of unpaid labor that we do for institutions when it comes to, connecting with, students, um, maybe being asked to do additional things like serving on, diversity committees or doing whatever the institution might be requesting of us. I also recognize that I might be, or I am in a position where I feel like I can say no to certain things. And so I recognize there might be folks who are here who might not feel like, well, I can't really say no for whatever reason. So I recognize that. But for me, it looks like, okay, hey, I'm at capacity, so I'm not going to be able to do this thing because, I'm tired. I do a lot for my institution. I do a lot to try to create a better experience for students, especially those with minoritized identities. And so sometimes I just can't do anything extra. But I think one of the other things that's really important for me to do as I celebrate and honor, my Blackness and various identities that I have is to just remember to have joy and experience that, because there's so much that happens on a day-to-day basis in the world and in our institutions that can really beat us down. And that can be so exhausting and so tiring for us, but we have to recharge and remember to have fun. So whatever that looks like, sometimes that's, putting on some music and just dancing, or, getting with your friends and talking or just laughing, right? Sometimes I scroll through social media and just crack up at different things that I see, but it's so important for us to take care of ourselves in various ways.
Yeah, I think it's about paving, the way it was paved for us, right? And it's paving the way for the folks to come behind us. And I think that's how I guess I celebrate or push forward is really giving back to my community, providing scholarships, providing service. And I think that's the joy that I have because of the position and where I am. And I think that's what I try to do, is not forget. Right. Yeah. There are people that sacrifice. There are people that have helped me get to where I am. And I think it's disrespectful to turn my back, and not be able to give back what was poured into me. So I think, yes, we have to, take care of ourselves, but we definitely cannot forget those that come behind us and what we are trying to do. And like I said, that's why you push forward. That's why you have those conversations. That's why you gather those degrees and you make your way up the food chain in order to be able to make that roll behind you a lot smoother. And I think that's, even being on this panel and talking to colleagues and peers across the country, it's really about how we can share these experiences with you all, how we can learn from you all, and how we can make it better for everybody else that comes behind us. And I think that's what's going to be really important moving forward.
Yeah, I think for me, in terms of celebrating culture, is similar to what other folks said in terms of acknowledging and celebrating the ancestors and the folks who have come before me. Definitely the music. And I'll just give one example of, for me, it's providing a space where Black students, and I will say other students of color, can come in my office and they know, you can come in there and you can just be who you are. I have first year mentee who black woman, young lady who came in my office, y'all, with a Wu-Tang t-shirt on, 18 years old. And I looked at her, I said, what you know about Wu-Tang? And she was like, who? And I was like, oh, listen, we went through a whole Wu-Tang. I was like, listen, you gotta start with Cream, you gotta go this way. And we sat there and we listened to some Wu-Tang. Cause I was like, what you're not gonna do is be out here. You know what I'm saying? No, I'm not getting old. I'm getting better. But you're just not gonna be out here, you know what I'm saying, representing, you don't even know what you representing, right? So I use that as an example to say, it's like, you know, acknowledging when our culture shows up in the moments that it shows up, where people, even if it's our own folks, don't even know that it's there. You know what I'm saying? Like that for me is part of how I celebrate my culture, is to continue to acknowledge it in every moment possible.
There is one question that just came through the chat as it relates to moving throughout your career. Where do you or did you start in terms of finding community in new locations? And I'll just say, you know, I think Brandon talked earlier about the urban leagues, the local chapter of NAACP, or you know, for if you're a member of NPHC organizations, trying to connect with those organizations. I know that they're in different spaces. You have Jack and Jill. You have there's another one comparable. I think Links. There's organizations. So I would say do the work, and there's likely organizations that, you know, aren't national, but they may be locally affiliated. You know, the 100 Black Men, the National Association of Negro Women. But do you all have any other thoughts about that question about how do you find community as you relocate and move throughout your career?
I will say so I lived in Iowa for 9 years, and that's not really knocking, but let's just be clear. It's like the whole state is like 3% Black people. So you can imagine like, you know. And so I find that the idea of finding, I mean, Black folks are everywhere, right? So you could find them, but I also think we can make the communities that we want to make. We can create the communities that we want. And by inviting, you know, different folks, whether it be Black, Brown, Asian, Indigenous, and even some white folks, if you into it, you know what I'm saying, to make the kind of space that we want, so that you can reach out and, you know, and create the kind of networking communities that you want to have. And I know I've been grateful for even some of the folks on the call to be able to create those kinds of communities and networks, both institutionally and community-based.
I think Lisa Jackson, you have your hand raised. Did you have a question?
I want to make a comment on the question that was just asked, if I
Okay,
can.
sure.
You know, so I have lived in a variety of states, from Tennessee to Maryland to Texas to Massachusetts, and now back in my home state of Illinois. And I have had a variety of experiences. But what I have learned is connecting to community is essential to my mental health and my satisfaction. What that community looks like can take on a variety of looks. So I don't think that there's a cookie cutter way as to how you can find that healthiness. But as Demetrius mentioned, you know, I'm in an NPHC organization, sorority. So I always make it a point to connect with my sorors because I hope that they can be my saving grace if I need it. I hope they can be a safe space too for me. I have also learned that everybody that look like me, I can't trust. So I have learned how to build, I'm a relationship builder. So I have learned how to build effective relationships with people that I can trust. that can be in my circle that I know I can go to when I have a challenge. If they work at my institution or outside of my institution, that's a safe zone. That will be my advocate, if you want to call them that, or be my sponsor, if you call them that. But just know that just because you look like me, don't mean that you got me. And that can burn you sometimes, because I did not always operate from that mindset. So be encouraged. Everyone who is also who you think may be out to get you may be your biggest advocate too. So just learn how to navigate the space that you're in and navigate from a space of wisdom. And also, we were earlier, it was conversations about how do you, read the room. Something that I've been reflecting on a lot lately as I've been growing in my faith walk has been the power of words. You can still say what you want to say, how you want to say it, if you choose the right words. So when it comes down to authentically being Dr. Jackson, you will go always get the genuine, authentic Lisa. Now, what words I use to say what I'm thinking, I'm going to think about, and I'm going to marinate on a little bit before I speak. But I'm going to show up who I am from the interview all the way to the boardroom. I'm going to show up who I am. So you ain't going to have no question, no diggity doubt about what you hired, or who you hired, I should say, because it's going to be genuinely me. And if you can't take me in the interview, boo-boo, then you want to think about if you want to hire me for this job on a permanent basis. I'm done.
And I'm so glad that we have hired you at the University of Illinois. I just want you to know that very much so.
I was going to add in real quick also something that Dr. Jackson was saying too, that's brought this thought to my mind too, is the power of the digital footprint as well, meaning like your social media presence, what you're doing on LinkedIn and so forth. I see a couple of people, it was a group that we started through our Twitter accounts called the Internet Cousins. I see some folks here in the room, and I think that's very key as well of finding that community. It's a group of Black people who found each other on Twitter, and we just kind of connected. And also from that connection, I actually found other people who live out here in Maryland through those connections. So I always say, I think your digital footprint is very key right now, especially in the pandemic, and also even like your professional organizations too, like within student affairs, I think is very key too, so.
Thank you all for your input, your feedback. I just wanted to do a quick, before you all leave us, thank you to all of our panelists for being here this afternoon. The African American Knowledge Community, we do have several events coming up as we approach our national conference. So please join us for our upcoming events on Monday, March 22nd. We have our virtual award celebration, as well as opportunities to connect with our regions. On Tuesday, March 23rd, we will have a panel of vice presidents on different levels at several HBCUs. It will be a really informative conversation about what it means to be a VP or in leadership at an HBCU. And then we will also have what would traditionally be our open meeting. Our meeting this year is really focused on what it means to be Black. And I just realized I put the wrong flyer up, but it's focused on the state of the Black professional. And so I would invite you all to join us for our upcoming events, that you would be in community with us that way. And also your feedback is really important to us as we continue to provide opportunities for engagement and career development through the AAKC. So please take a brief assessment, use the QR code or the link here. In terms of the events, those events will be they will be present in the NASPA schedule, so you can sign up for those events via the NASPA schedule. Yes, I can put the link in the chat again. And your feedback is really important. Your attendance here is important. At one point, I think we had about 93 people. So we hope that you would continue to be engaged with the KC, and that you would even also consider being involved. So thank you all for being here on this Friday afternoon. It's sunny in most places. It's decently warm in most places. So I hope that you'll have a chance to get out and get some vitamin D. Have a great afternoon, a great weekend, and we'll see you later next month, hopefully.